It says it's recording, so let's just go, and then if I have to recreate the training video, I can do it pretty quickly for you. So, so basically, creating the deal in our rehab software. All that we need to do is, so within my deals, we'll just click New Deals at the top. Okay. And again, really the main purpose of this software is we're just using it so that it can kick out the numbers that we want to use within our spec sheet. We're not using it at this point for anything else. So all I typically do is I just do a quick description. In this case, the address is fine. And because we're going to run two scenarios, the first one is going to be an all cash scenario. So I usually just mark it as cash. Other than that, the rest of this information doesn't need to be filled out because, again, we're not using this for any sort of external marketing purposes. So I save it. And then the assumptions panel. So this is where we put in our numbers. So the purchase price it's the price that we will be advertising to our buyers. Because that's ultimately, when it runs the calculations, it's based on that assignment price, not on the price we have it under contract. So for ULIT, can you remind me what was our contract price?
It's 332, but contract, sorry.
Yes, you're right. So the contract price is 320, but our advertised price is going to be 332. So that's the figure that I will put in here because that's the price to the buyer. And then for our closing costs, again, we can go quite detailed, but typically we'll just do a lump sum or a percentage type of input. And the percentage usually works pretty well. So on a deal like this, we can say 1%.
How do you determine the closing cost?
Well, closing costs, no, that's a good question. Closing costs typically range from anywhere from 1% to 3%, but rarely are above $3,000. So, applying a 1%, I think for the typical deal that we're working on makes sense because most of our deals are sort of in the 150 to 300K range. And this is a sort of thing that's not going to break the deal. It's not going to break the numbers, but it is an area. It is a number that we can adjust as needed. So usually, if we just assume 1% and it's close to 3,000 on a $300,000 property, that's fine. Obviously, on 150K, it's going to be much less than that. This is also something that you can talk to Mark about because ultimately he's going to be much closer to that side of the equation. But I would say that this is probably a general rule of thumb.
Right. So every time I fill this out, I just put 1%, right?
Yes. Yeah. Just do 1%. I think that'll be fine. And then holding costs really pertains to any holding costs of a project other than finance costs, because the financing costs will be captured in a different section. So holding costs, as an example, again, you can go detailed. We usually just do a quick lump sum, but you can see here these are the sort of holding costs that you might incur as an investor if you're doing a flip. So there's going to be monthly insurance, utility costs, property tax is something that you would be responsible for paying. And so a typical rule of thumb for us is we assume around $500 per month as a standard sort of cost of holding a property in Austin through a rehab. Now, what you need to consider is the duration of the project. So in this case for ULIT, this is a new build project. And so when you look in Podio, you'll see a description in the deal whiteboard that says new build. And a typical new build is going to be anywhere from, say, 10 to 12 months as kind of a rule of thumb. And so what that means is we'd be looking at $500 a month for 12 months equals $6,000. Does that make sense? Is that correct math? 5 times 12 is 6,000, I believe. So that would be our holding costs for this deal because it's going to be a 12-month project.
Okay, so minimum per month is 500.
Yes, that's usually that's what we assume, unless we unless we learn something out of the ordinary about a particular property or project, we just make assumptions. And in this case, we assume about $500 a month should be enough to cover your taxes, some basic insurance, and maybe, you know, the basic utility costs of, you know, servicing the project while it's under rehab. Okay.
Okay, got it.
And then for line 4, including holding costs. We can include that in the loan. That's fine. Moving into the rehab. So again, you'd get this information from Podio. And so for this project, and actually what you'll want to do is when you go into Google Drive and you go into the property folder, right? Because you now have access to that. What you'll find, so if we go into the ULIT, so these are all the documents that we've gathered through the acquisitions process. Again, this information will be in Podio for you, but what you can see here is what we have estimated for this project.
I saw that.
You saw this, right?
Yeah,
and
I couldn't understand.
Yeah. Sorry, you did notice this?
I opened it, but I was looking for information, but I really didn't understand it. So
no problem. This is basically a calculator that we use on the acquisition side to run our numbers to determine what our offer price is going to be. And so we put in our general assumptions, but what you can see here is the rehab. In this case, because it's a new build project, in order to build this site based on the assumptions we've made around square footage, we're estimating $300,000. Okay, so that information, let me just go back into the software, is what we'd enter in this rehab.
Okay, got it.
Right, because that's what this project is going to cost. It's going to cost $300K because it's a new build, and so we're going to update that amount. Again, we'll make sure that sort of information is captured in Podio, so you're not having to go into those spreadsheets in the document folders. But sometimes you may want to better understand, you know, how did we come up with our purchase price and all that, and that spreadsheet is what we use. Now here, obviously, it says project rehab period in months. So again, we discussed 12 months, which probably is conservative. It's probably, you know, someone could likely do this in less, but you know, we want to try to be a little more conservative with our projections. So continuing down. I have a question. Yeah, of course.
So for new build, it usually takes 10 to 12 months. For last time, sorry, I didn't get the Taylor flip.
Yes.
How many months was it again?
We estimated 3 months.
So for flips, it usually takes...
Honestly, it completely depends on the project, because it might just be a simple cosmetic update where someone's coming in and just putting in a new kitchen, and that could be done in a month. Or, you know, Taylor, for example, you've seen the pictures, is basically it's a full gut. You know, the house is largely down to the studs, and so it's going to take more time to complete. And so that duration of the project is something that, you know, between the acquisition side and working with Mark, we determine an estimate to complete the project. So it's gonna be different every time, but we'll make sure that we include a note in the deal whiteboard in Podio that'll give you that information. And this is the sort of stuff that we're going to continue to work out. But again, being a new build, generally 10 to 12 months is a pretty safe number to complete a project of this type of this size. Okay. Now, when you come into the financing section, now, if you recall, this is the cash scenario. So all you need to do is you change this to all cash, and it automatically gets rid of all the other fields because there are no finance related criteria. It's an all cash situation. So we're almost done. On the right here, so again, if you recall, there are 2 exit strategies. Exit strategy 1 is flip. Exit strategy 2 is hold. But in this case, this is a flip project. And again, we will notify you in Podio about the deal if it's a hold or a flip. Sometimes it's both, but usually it's kind of a one or the other, a bit depending on the deal. So in this case, we're going to just quickly enter in a few numbers for exit strategy 1. And so our after repair value, I believe in Podio, we said it was about $812,000. Again, you can see in the spreadsheet, this field here, this is how we determine the ARV. So we look at the comps, right? And we say, okay, based on properties that have sold, that we're new build in the area. We derive some averages, and that gives us an estimated after repair value. So when this property is built and it's sold retail, what could it realistically sell for? And so in this case, it's 812,000. So that is our ARV number. So we just put in 812,000. And then months to complete the sale. So this ultimately, Mark and Jackie are going to be the best person to answer this. But this is, once the house is built, how long is it going to take for them to actually sell it retail on the MLS? And this number will vary because in theory, you could sell the property before it's completed. In many cases, people like to wait for a finished product before selling because they can get a higher price because it's finished, it's staged, it's much nicer to look at. So again, general rule of thumb, depending on the market, anywhere from 1 to 2 months would be the most that we would plan for. And so again, we can put in 2% here just as a rule of thumb. So what that means is, we have 12 months to build it and then an additional 2 months to sell it, to close and to get out of the project. And so that is an important number because when we look at the summary, that factors in your resale costs, so the cost of paying commissions and things like that. So there's only 2 more changes that need to be made here under the resale price. Again, in this case, our after repair value, line 17, is the same as our resale price. And it almost always is because we assume that what we can sell it for is the same as what the ARV is. And that's just, basic assumption. The only other change that we make here, so the projected cost of sale is that's the retail the realtor commissions when you sell a property. And you may know this in Austin, it's 6%, 3 goes to the buyer agent, 3 goes to the seller. But we always assume 3% in our numbers. And the reason why is because the majority of the times our buyers are either partnered with a realtor or have their license themselves. So they rarely ever pay both commissions. They usually only have to pay a buyer's commission fee, not the seller's commission fee. Okay. So that basically, those are all the inputs. So the last thing you do in order to populate the spec sheet is we just go into view reports, just on the top here, and we press full presentation for flip. And then when we generate, this is going to generate a report with all of those inputs. And when you go to the second page and you scroll down, you'll see all of our numbers for this deal for a cash scenario. And this is the information that you're going to pull and put into the spec sheet. Okay. And that's the gist of it for the cash scenario. So again, takes 5 or so minutes as you get comfortable, assuming all the information is available to you in Podio, which is our responsibility. You should be able to very quickly create this before you prepare the spec sheet and before you start working on the MailChimp, because this is really these are the numbers that you're going to need to market out the deal.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that's good. And so I usually, it automatically saves, but I always, just because I'm paranoid, I always save it again. And so the last thing we want to do is just go back to your inputs. And when you hover over the save button, you can see where it says clone this deal. And so what we want to do is we want to clone it because now we want to quickly run the exact same property through a hard money loan situation just to see what our numbers look like. So all I do is I clone it. It'll automatically duplicate this deal. And then I just change it to hard money. I save it. And again, all the numbers have copied over. So really the only thing that we need to update is the financing terms. So we click financing, and here we got to go and update. And this is how we do it. So under the lender's cap, ARV, or cost, this is basically saying, does the lender lend based on the after repair value or the cost of the project? And we always assume the after repair value because one of the main hard money lenders that we work with, Nexus Lending, lends at 70% of the ARV. Okay. And so we need to update that figure because that basically is saying 70% of the ARV is the max that it can loan. Our lender does 2 points origination and 0 at closing. And here it says points and closing costs upfront or back end. We have it back end. Oh, sorry. No, that's paid up front. So those closing costs and those points are paid when the loan is originated. So that means when they close and they get their money, they have to pay those fees up front. The interest rate that our lender lends at is 10.75%. Interest payment during rehab is no. We're not splitting any profits with the lender. And that's it. So basically, again, running this scenario, what we see, everything else remains the same. And then we, just do a quick save, and then you would do the same thing. So you'd go again into view reports, second page. And again, this is where you get your numbers for financing. And there are some changes here. So you got to pay close attention, because obviously now we have financing costs for this project, which are actually very significant because it's a new build opportunity. Cash committed changes. So some of these variables have changed now. Your ROI and everything else has changed. And that's kind of it. So that basically gives you the inputs that you will need. Now, we will make sure, on a new build situation, in reality, very few people are going to use hard money, because it's very expensive, at 10.75%. What you typically find on a new build is they're taking some form of a construction loan out, which is more in the range of 6 to 7% interest. And so that's just something to keep in mind on a new build project, because we may, in all likelihood, adjust this percentage. But we'll flag that in the deal whiteboard, so that if these terms are standard for a typical 1 to 4, 1 to 6 month rehab, but anything new build or longer term will likely have different terms, and that makes a big difference. Because if you look here, if I put in 6%, you can see right away that our profit skyrockets, our return adjusts, our ARV adjusts, because that interest cost is pretty significant on a project of this size, right? So I'm actually, because we're preparing this for this ULIT property that we're going to be marketing out, I'm going to leave it at 6%, because that in all likelihood is what the investor is going to look at if they look at a hard money type of scenario. Okay.
And it looks better.
Yeah. It looks better on paper. But it's also reflective of what realistically will happen if someone is going to be borrowing for this project, which they likely will. Okay. So this is saved now. And so basically, when you go back to new deals, or my deals, sorry, when you come to this main page, you'll see that we have 2 deal scenarios for this property. One's cash, one's hard money. Those will always be saved. And you can see, kind of going back, we have duplicates. In some cases we might have a third scenario if it's a hold as well. But in most cases we have a cash scenario and we have a hard money lending scenario. And that's basically how you use the software to feed into the spec sheet.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep. I was also looking for the realist report in the Google Drive.